Welcome back to Cheche. We're live on Citizen TV and we're considering the state of Kenya's democracy, our processes and institutions. Why? Because with the presidential petition at the Supreme Court, the nurses' strike in its third month, and with every election cycle being accompanied by violence, albeit on varying scales, we find that industrial action is all too regular an occurrence. So what does this say about democracy in Kenya? Well, today's guest is Dr. Alex Awiti, Director of the East African Institute at the Aga Khan University. And so we've talked about the problems, the promise, at independence, and the reality, which is that you want your person in any sort of position of influence. And during the break, Mutegi, you were making the point about the choices we make when faced with the prospect of a competent, innovative leader versus a leader cut in the mold of the very worst of Kenya.
You see, sometimes back, I always remember about Communist Party.
Kamlesh Patni.
Kamlesh Patni put this country now.
Apostle Paul.
Yeah, Paul, yes. Because of going back, everything changed. The inflation, and he formed a party, and there were followers, and some people were elected to that party. Same thing is replaying here. People who are very corrupt have been elected to power. Kenyans don't see that as a problem. At the expense of honest citizens. Exactly. Now, in Mr. Rai, for instance, the guy who was very close to the people, who was working there, and he didn't get voted for. He instead is voting for another person who is associated with powers that be. So what kind of... And although we are saying they are young people, did the young people make any changes when it came to electing our leaders?
It's funny that you talk about Sterehe, because both all the candidates, I think, the bulk of them were young.
Yeah. Yes. Actually, all of them.
All of them were young. Yeah, the three, I believe.
Yeah. Charles Jaguar, Steve Bogo, and
Boniface Mwangi.
Yes.
And what has confounded a lot of people is that the people of Sterehe overlooked Boniface Mwangi and his record of activism and innovative campaigning to go for the musician Jaguar.
Which was shocking. I mean, that's what we were saying. What do people vote for? Why do Kenyans vote for people who are known to be corrupt?
Is Jaguar corrupt? He's not here to defend himself.
I'm talking about generally, not about Jaguar. In fact, if you compare Jaguar and Boniface, Jaguar is a system person. The other one is a people person. So they chose the system person and not the people person. The same way they chose a corrupt governor to elect a corrupt governor and not the proper one. Can you see the amount of resistance that Governor Mutua got in Machakos, despite the fact that he was viewed as the best governor ever? He was a class, but he almost lost. That shows what kind of Kenya.
Actually, there are governors who are voted back overwhelmingly, despite having cases or being investigated by EACC, and that is information in the public domain.
Our viewers, democracy is dead in our country. It can be brought back the hard way, which is where Kenya is about to go. The final verdict of the court, the Supreme Court, will be the beginning of democracy. I exercised my democratic right by voting peacefully and gave my vote freely, but it hurts when leaders translate my vote as a tool for violence as a result of incitement. Cheche, democracy in Kenya elects and few benefit. It's still on trial. Again, there isn't much confidence.
There's no optimism.
No confidence, no optimism from our viewers.
Before we took the break, Alex was bringing a very interesting perspective. This issue about, look at the people around Uhuru Kenyatta, look at the people around William Ruto, look at the people around Raila Odinga. You'd be shocked that there are people around Uhuru Kenyatta who are Luos. There are people around Raila Odinga who are Kikuyus. There are people around William Ruto who are either Luos or Kikuyus, for that matter. And yet, you still have Kikuyus who are living below the $1 a day, and you have Luos who are living lavishly, spending probably up to $10,000 a day. Quite interesting. What really do we want?
And the broader point was that our politics has been framed as an ethnic one, and yet when you look into the personal lives of our leaders, you find that they don't subscribe to the
tribal,
ethnic
back.
So let me make this. Let me try and get to the bottom of this. I think what we are seeing
is a very astute political elite who have mastered the game that Kenyan politics is. They know where to mobilize and they know where to consolidate in terms of their power, class power, and to keep the public away from demanding goods and services that come out of the process that is called democracy. So you have things like slums, you have matatus, and you have all manner of public dysfunction, but you leave them there because it is a strategy of containment. Don't break it if you won't fix it. So let's not go into providing fair and decent, accessible housing. Just leave it there. Leave them wallow in there. And then you have all the other things, the dysfunction, and then you use political. So it's the patronage, it's clientelism, and then it is that ethnicity. And it is supposed to distract Kenyans from organizing around class and social interests. It is why the trade unions do not work when we're saying that the minimum wage is not a livable wage, for instance. Why aren't trade unions being at the forefront of the political organizing process to basically tell Kenyans that this is what you ought to demand from the political process?
And we see examples of that in South Africa.
We see examples of that in South Africa.
Past and present.
Absolutely, absolutely. So what is really stopping us from organizing around those lines? And as we have all pointed out here, the political class is wealthy across the ethnic divide. The poverty and the squalid existence of Kenyans is equitable across the divide, the ethnic divide. There are many Kenyans now, from whatever ethnic grouping they come from, who are struggling with meeting the basic necessities, but they cannot put those forth in a political conversation because they're contained in this other space where you're told your money is in there, so just
one of our
there's something we've forgotten: money. The campaigns, the elections campaigners are spending huge sums of money.
Which is why the MPs feel that their salaries should not be cut because they need to recoup.
Yeah, exactly. That's what the women representative from Kambu said, that she got into trouble. Now,
she wasn't the only one to say that. From Homa Bay as well.
Yes,
her counterpart in Homa Bay said that.
Now, when you spend all that kind of money in terms of billions, as a governor candidate or a presidential candidate, how do you get your money back?
Because obviously
the parliament refused, or I don't know who did, but there is no cap. There is no cap for spending, financing, campaign financing. It is not there. That's now when it comes to when you are elected, you want, if you are the governor, you want to give tenders to somebody who will give you something so that you get back your money.
Actually,
when you are the president or wherever, you want to give the cabinet seat to people who will go to. It used to happen in NSSF and in National Insurance Fund, whatever parastatal. That's where the problem is. Money. Okay. Money.
Someone, this is the only dissenting view that I've seen so far from our viewers. Cheche, Robert, I totally agree with Mutegi. We are heading in a positive way. But then Joyce gives us a suggestion. An audit on the implementation of the Constitution is recommended so that some positions should be scrapped, especially nominated members. Any action on this? Why should a poor country like Kenya have unnecessary 290 constituencies instead of 120? Why is Nairobi so small and yet it has 17? Democracy is a con game. It's a word invented to placate people, to make them accept a given institution.
I think you're right. You know, I was just reading, so the PS education, basic education, was talking about disbursements to support, to schools. He's talking about miserable amounts of money. You know, for the number of kids that we have in school, about 10 million in primary school, and about maybe another 3 million in secondary school. So we have 23. We have about. You know, the cohort is huge, but we're not going to spend in this term anything close to what we spent in election. We spent 50 billion in elections.
Actually, it's much larger than that. It's close to 60 billion. Because think about the petition at the Supreme Court as well.
So primary schools are getting 2 billion. The primary school head teachers are very happy. The secondary schools are going to get 6 billion. But look at those numbers. And I think that's what goes to the viewer's point, that this we need to rationalize this process and begin to figure out, are we spending money in the right places? I know that democracy will pay dividends in terms of creating a free and fair society. Free enterprise will thrive, more taxes will be collected. But we should be very careful about how much investment are we putting in this thing up front. Is it really worth it? So those deep questions must be asked. And as Ulrich said before on the break, our education system has also failed us. We've failed to produce individuals who can think critically within that system without being considered as being dissenting in a political process. That if you ask the hard questions, you're not necessarily being negative. You're basically trying to ask the system to be much more robust and for us to be more thoughtful about
it. It means
things.
You care.
Absolutely.
Rather than you are criticizing.
So here's a question I might pose. Is a 5-year cycle of election really necessary for us? Given the acrimony that it creates, and given the fact that from a statistical point, there's no incumbent that has lost, can't we just go for a 10-year fixed term and then you go? You know, I think we need to be, and I'm sure I'm going to piss off a lot of people, but I say
so
to
you mind your language, huh?
I'm going to upset a lot of people, but I say this is one of our biggest problems. We have to start thinking like people who have a brain in their head and examining our context and asking, is this fit for purpose? And what is that purpose?
What is the purpose? Because we're winding up now. What is that purpose? This is what James Shikwati, who's been a guest on Cheche, says. The state of democracy in the modern world must be alive to the role of digital technology versus the erosion of individual choice. So what is that purpose?
The purpose, in my view, is that the colonies handed as a poison chalice. A highly fractured society. I don't know how much consent was in bringing all these communities together. So our biggest and
that was never their purpose.
And foremost commitment should be, how do we stitch together Project Kenya? How do we make this country work? And how do we start to move deliberately to deliver the goods of social justice in an inclusive, fair society, so that our politics become less of a zero-sum game, but people can feel, touch, and see democracy. That politics is not just abstract rhetoric, but it is a mechanism for delivering the people's goods. That politics and development are not necessarily antagonistic conceptions, but those things are together. That politics is a necessary ingredient for structuring options about delivering development agendas.
Well, President Kenyatta, when he was declared the winner, he held a hand of
extended
a hand and he said he welcomes, and if he continued, if he is declared the winner by the court and he includes everybody, every aspect of this country into his government, in parastatals, in...
Do you believe that will happen, given the example of the last 5 years?
I'm saying if he did it.
Fair enough, but you're not the first person to say that. So on the precedent of the last 5 years, do you believe that that will happen?
I don't know whether I believe or not, but I'm saying that should happen. If he wants to create the kind of society that he is talking about, then he has to include everybody. He has to. If he doesn't want this thing again, he has to including people who are not who did not vote for him in the government.
But he already has a Luo person in his government.
For me,
that is tokenism. I'm not talking about tokenism. I'm talking about serious work.
Yeah.
People who can seriously, and they are given those jobs because they will do it. Not tokenism.
And so beyond tokenism, you're also talking about people who are not necessarily connected to his family.
Yes, no, not
or through the past or business connections.
Yes. For me, it would work. It doesn't matter who is included or however wide President Kenyatta, if the Supreme Court gives him the mandate, opens his arm. For me, he needs to ensure, should the Supreme Court give him this mandate, that we have social services, we have social justice. The person in Mukuru Kwayaba should live in a decent house. The estate could retain the name, but the house should be decent. I mean, if anybody pays taxes directly or indirectly, they should get value for their money, regardless of whether they voted for him, regardless of whether their person is in power or anything else. That much will start steering Kenyans towards appreciating democracy. For now, Mutegi and I and Alex and you will appreciate that we are moving positively towards democracy, because we drive, we have food on our tables, we take a shower at least 2, 3, 4 times a day. What about that person, regardless of where they come from, Nyeri, Kisumu, Murang'a, Turkana, or wherever, who did not eat supper last night and has not had breakfast today,
And
would you
for
tell him there is democracy?
And for that to happen, you must stop the wastage you're talking about. We must curb corruption, so that the money that is going to people's pockets for buying helicopters and stuff then goes to Mukuru Kayaba and Kaongware. That is the way to happen. But as long as that consumption is there, that corruption is there, then those fellows in Mukuru will live the way they were living until kingdom come.
Yeah, and the people in Mukuru should start appreciating the fact that, I'm sorry we are using Mukuru so many times, they should start appreciating the fact that you don't need one of your own in a position of power to get services. All you need is somebody who will deliver, a servant and not a master.
You've talked about social justice and the individuals, but what about, if we're talking about democracy, we're talking about processes and institutions, and what about ensuring that all of these work?
Absolutely, but you see, Woodwork, as I said, this is what we call isomorphic mimicry. We have all the systems that should create the fundamental checks and balances across the institutional structure of the country.
So things on paper.
On paper, but they're not working in reality. Like, for instance, Uhuru's government cannot be profligate in terms of how it spends and wastes money when we have a parliament.
Yeah,
Parliament cannot go rogue when you have citizens.
Yes.
So this is really what we have to make sure works.
And citizens cannot make a wrong choice if they know what they want.
Yeah.
So if we want corrupt leaders, we will elect corrupt leaders. If we are not interested in social justice, we will go for anybody who gives us that token.
Mutegi, your final thoughts, because we're winding up?
I am very positive myself. I think we are on the right path, but we need to check the people who are leading us, from the MCA up to the president. We must hold them to account. That's the way forward.
Interesting. So look, we're out of time, so we'll wind up now. Alex, I'll give you a final thought, because there's a suggestion here about auditing the state of affairs in the country, the constitution, whether it's delivered, and then revising accordingly. Surely that should happen in a democracy.
Absolutely. I think a democracy is not as, it cannot be delivered canned and sealed in a static way. It is progress. It is an ongoing conversation. And I think Kenyans, we have to get to a point, we have to start tolerating a capacity to ridicule, to critique, to contradict, and to ask hard questions about this process. And those are not necessarily dissenting views, they're not necessarily pessimistic. But I think on the broad sweep of things, as citizens who've come through an election now, we own the process. We have elected these leaders, let's hold them accountable. It is about accountability. We cannot sit here and whine eternally when we, the citizens, have the power, but we're just not exercising that power.
We
can petition our parliamentarians to question the government. What about signatures and saying, here's a petition, take it to parliament?
But remember that part of the reason why the petition at the Supreme Court is ongoing is because of digital technology. And that was the point that James Shikwati was making in the erosion of individual choice. So even though you have active citizens who are participating, as the Constitution mandates, you still have the specter of all of that being undermined by
Woodwork, I'm sorry to bring back his name, but Musando, before he died,
IBC,
he actually said that
technology
it is not technology that is the problem. It is the people who work in the technology. So it's about the citizens again. So if we have gotten ourselves into a situation where technology now seems to subvert the popular will of the people, don't look at technology. Look at ourselves. Can we look in the mirror and say we all did right by our country?
And I'm sorry, Woodwork, I know we are short of time. Talking about digital era and the public interest, I will take you back to President Obama's visit to Kenya, when one media station quoted his visit as going to a place, and I paraphrase, that is dogged with terror attacks and terror threat and all that.
That was CNN, and Kenyans responded.
Kenyans on Twitter. That was the public. What happened? The vice president of the CNN had to come and apologize to the state. Why can't we use technology in that case?
And so that goes back to the point about people being at the other end of technology. So that's what we have time for this morning. Our thanks go to today's guest, Dr. Alex Owiti, Director of the East Africa Institute at the Aga Khan University. Our thanks also to our panelists, Ntagin Jao and Charles Odhiambo. We thank you also for watching, listening and engaging with us here on Cheche. We will see you next week.